Tim Bilecki. I'm here with Michael Waddington with another episode of the Military Law News Network. What I want to talk about in this episode, Mike, are some of the recent cases that we're seeing in sexual assault and in court-martials in general that are on the news, as well as a real interesting new policy that the Navy's putting out to curb sexual assaults that may actually involve some common sense. And let's go ahead and talk about that. It was in the news this morning about some of what the Navy is doing to try to curb these allegations of sexual assault that may actually take a common sense approach. Go ahead and talk about that, Mike.
You know, interestingly, Tim, we've been talking about this for years. The military solution and the solution that Congress has for stopping sex assaults is by spending millions and millions of dollars on prosecutions, investigators, training, stuff like that, and it's had the opposite effect. It's just drummed up more court-martials, there's been more false allegations, and there's more acquittals. Well, the Navy is taking a new approach that I thought was pretty basic. I'm surprised no one did this before, although this might cut down on the court-martials, but it's also going to affect the bottom line of liquor sales on the Navy bases. Basically, what they're doing is they're instilling sort of a policy that limits the amount of alcohol that is being promoted on bases. It limits the times that alcohol can be purchased. For example, if you're having a beer pong party and it's midnight, you can no longer, starting in October, you're not going to be able to go out at midnight, 1 in the morning, and buy another couple cases of beer or whiskey because the alcohol sales are being stopped at a certain time in the evening to stop those late night binges. The other thing they're doing, which I think makes a ton of sense, is they are limiting, or I'm sorry, not limiting, but they're increasing the amount of their enlisted corps and the officer corps and their involvement in watching these young individuals that are living in base housing, in the barracks, in the dorms, whatever service members call them different things, but they're putting patrols out there. So you might have an E7, E8 that goes out on a nightly basis, walks through the barracks, through the dorms, and just make sure that there's none of these crazy parties. There's no binge drinking. There's no people that are getting, they're trying to stop sex assaults before they occur, which I think is really smart because, Tim, despite what the Pentagon is saying, despite what Congress is saying, the majority of the sex assaults are not violent rapists running around raping people. It's two people drunk, usually both of them are drunk, and the next morning they wake up and they're like, what the hell did we just do? So alcohol is at the core, probably at 90% of these sexual assaults.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. I think it's a pretty good solution because I think if you stop some of the amount of drinking that we have, we're also going to stop the false allegations. Because if we have two individuals who aren't having these totally drunken hookups that happen in the barracks or outside the barracks or wherever after these beer pong parties or wherever it is, we're not going to have the scenario where John wakes up with Mary and Mary's like, oh, what if my husband finds out? How did this happen? Or, wow, I was so drunk I don't know if I remember all this. It takes the problem away because if the drinking is curbed somewhat, we may not have what I call these false allegations or these he said, she said claims or these drunk sex or aggravated college claims. They may not exist. And so really it's no different as long as you target it and use it common sense that we target it. The general audience, if we have junior enlisted, E1s, E2s, E3s, E4s, even E5s, it's like college, Mike. When I stayed in the dorm when I was at Boston College, they had RAs, people that walked up and down to make sure that there were no big parties, that the drinking wasn't getting out of control. Why not do the same thing in the military? Is almost, I'd say 70, 80, maybe even 90% of the sexual assaults I see, they're all related to alcohol. No one's jumping out of the bushes and raping people. People are making claims based on alcohol. So if we can curb some of the drinking, we might not have as many claims of sexual assault. I'm not conceding that all these claims are legitimate. I'm certainly not conceding that. But if we stop the amount of claims, we stop the amount of false allegations, the number of court-martials gets reduced, and we focus on court-martialing the people who are actually committing sexual assault, everyone wins. And so I think it's a smart approach, Mike.
And Tim, you know what's interesting about this? By having these patrols, having someone in leadership walk through the barracks just to make sure that there's not a raging party going on and nobody's passed out in the bathroom, it's free. These the leadership that are walking through the building they work for the Navy, so they don't have to pay them extra money. There's no new jobs being created. It just gives them a little extra duty that they have to do.
Sure.
But it's different from the approach that's being pushed by Congress, which is more money, more prosecutors, more investigators. And we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars that have been pumped into this program that have actually, it's like throwing gas on a fire, when a common sense approach, this is the same approach that I would use on my own kids. You know, go into their room, make sure that they're not in there smoking weed. And if my kids are young, but I'm just giving you an example. If you're a parent and you go to make sure your kids aren't having a raging party in their room, you can't act surprised, for example, if you know that this is going on in your own house or in your own barracks or your own dorm, and you do nothing about it. You don't try to stop the problem before it starts. And throwing money after it after the crime occurs, the alleged crime occurs, is not going to solve the problem. The way that they've been going about this war on sexual assault, we've said this all along, it's about creating jobs, about creating money, or creating jobs, employees. It's about money. And how does throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at every possible case, whether it's false allegation or a true allegation, stop sexual assaults? It really doesn't. You stop sexual assaults before they occur. And apparently, according to the news report I read, the one we were talking about, they tried this policy for a given period of time at the Great Lakes Naval Base, and it drastically reduced sexual assaults. So hopefully this works for the Navy, and I'm surprised that the other branches haven't gone with such a simple approach from the very beginning.
The only thing I'll add to that is they say it dropped the amount of sexual assault. In my opinion, it probably dropped the amount of claimed sexual assaults.
I agree, Tim. It doesn't mean it, right, because maybe 3/4 of the claims were just false buyer's remorse type cases.
And if we can stop these individuals from drinking into oblivion, we won't have buyer's remorse. Without buyer's remorse, we don't have these false allegations, and everyone wins. It's a free solution where everyone wins, and it's actually fairly refreshing that the Navy's doing something. I think they're doing the right thing. And I think you're going to see a pretty big impact in places where I'm at, where there's no option to take a taxi or go off base and go to the ABC liquor store and buy another fifth of vodka. If you're in Yokosuka, if you're at Camp Casey, there's nowhere else to buy liquor except for the Class 6. So if you can't buy it there and you're not stocked up, and if you're stocked up and you walk in and you've got 15 cases of beer and a ton of liquor, that someone can see that, it might curb the drinking, which again curbs the buyer's remorse, which curbs the false allegations, and maybe we'll have less innocent sailors in prison for free. Great solution.
So I applaud the Navy for that. The other thing we were going to hit on, Tim, you mentioned there are 3 really big cases going on in the news. We've been kind of updating our viewers as these cases have progressed. The first one being the General Sinclair court-martial for sexual assault going on at Fort Bragg right now. What's the status of that case right now, Tim?
Right now, they're still in jury selection. We've been talking quite a bit recently about the importance of jury selection, the importance of getting a fair trial, and nowhere is this more evident than in the General Sinclair trial, where we are literally having 2, 3, 4 stars descend in to a court-martial. I believe right now they are on day 3. They did 3 days of jury selection, and I believe that they sat 2 or 3 potential members, and the case has been continued. I don't remember the exact date to which it's been continued. I think it's continued till the middle of August so they can get more potential members. So that's where we're at. The interesting thing on this is it's been kind of parrots back what we've been talking about, Mike, and is a great example of how important jury selection is. One of the members who was taken off of the jury basically said, if I convict General Sinclair, I'm automatically going to give him life in prison without knowing any of the facts of the case. He was gone. There was another member which said that they basically are friends with some of the witnesses and they can't give a fair trial. And the defense and I know Lieutenant Colonel Hellickson, who was leading the prosecution, they argued back and forth as to whether they should remain or not. And Colonel Pohl, properly, in my opinion, granted the challenges on numerous of the generals. So we're still in the middle of the jury selection process, more to follow. That's going to be a great trial to watch. But after 3 days, I believe that they've only sat 2 or 3 members, which is a bit, it's not surprising, but at the same time it is.
Yeah, usually, Tim, the jury's seated by noon, and you're doing your opening statement at 1 o'clock after a lunch break in
Yes.
most of these cases. And moving on to another case, the Major Hasan case has been drawing a lot of attention. Now, it's finally gotten the trial. It's been years since the shooting, and he is now representing himself, and I believe they had just picked a jury this week. But there's some issues going on in the news about the case. A lot of people are outraged that Major Hasan has been drawing full pay and benefits since the shooting, whereas many of the people that were shot and not killed are suffering financially. There's some of them are being denied certain benefits because the president and the army has refused to declare this an act of terrorism, and rather they consider it an act of workplace violence. And that was the topic of a New York Times article regarding that case. What are your thoughts on whether or not that case should have been declared a workplace violence versus an act of terror, Tim?
Well, before I go to that point, there was a great article. It was in, of all places, I believe it was the Colleen Tribune or the Colleen Herald, the local newspaper, where the article basically stated, and I forget the number, Mike, but there was, I think, over $2 or $3 million that have been spent on this trial alone, between the additional security, between all of the additional witnesses that have to be flown in, the experts, and so on. $3 million of taxpayer money has been spent on this trial. And the fact that it's years later, we have Major Hasan, who now wants to defend himself. Frankly, I don't envy Colonel Poppy's position. He's the military defense attorney who's assigned to the case, heading up the charge, a very good attorney by all regards. Essentially got fired by his client not for anything he did. He's doing a hell of a job on the case. Basically tried to get away from the case, saying he couldn't represent him for a whole host of ethical reasons. Now he's an advisor to Major Hasan, who's making a mockery of the whole process. He's getting paid every day while this trial drags on. It's a joke. It really is a joke, and that's not a joke in the fact of the court-martial system or anything the defense is doing or the prosecution is doing. The case should have been tried a long time ago. There's delay after delay after delay. I can't wait to get a verdict. I can probably figure out what the verdict's going to be, and we can move on. Now, the second point of that is, should have been act of terrorism. You know, that's a tough call, Mike. It's a real slippery slope when we start saying these are acts of terrorism. And I don't know if I'm ready to go so far as to say it should have been an act of terrorism, although it was plainly the evidence is he's a jihadist, and it was likely an act of terrorism. But I'm not ready to go on the record quite yet to say that it should have been declared as one, only because in this case it probably was. But where do you draw the line? How do you set the rules on what is and what is not? And that's my only concern. This case certainly should be, but how do we define that? And that's a little bit trickier question.
Well, Tim, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that. I think it is an act of terror. It's a little different than a disgruntled employee shooting his boss because he's going to get fired. And this individual in this case claimed from the beginning that he shot these service members on behalf of the Taliban to protect Taliban people from being killed, who are our enemies. And based on the news, I'm not intimately involved in what was on his emails and his activities, but it sounds to me like he was a jihadist. And again, he's going to get his day in court if he would quit dragging his feet. But the interesting twist of this is, the sad part of this is that the people that he shot and either killed or wounded get a different set of benefits. And I'm particularly focused on the ones that he didn't kill. I mean, he shot a lot of people that were seriously critically wounded, and they're now being given the runaround from the VA and from the Army because they are not given that elevated status that they should be given, in my opinion, as victims. As if you were shot, if you deployed over to Kuwait and you were involved in a truck accident, you would get more benefits in terms of medical treatment and care than you would if you were gunned down by Major Hasan. And for that reason alone, I thought that they should bump the status up of the victims to something other than a workplace violence, so that they can get the benefits they deserve. Because some of these people these are great service members that were shot and killed or wounded. and now some of them are suffering physical, financial, mental disabilities because of Hasan. And Hasan's over here on the other hand making them, like you said, I agree with you, making a mockery out of our system, getting paid, full pay. The other thing is the military is pursuing the death penalty in this case, and this could be the topic of another show, which is also increasing the cost of the court-martial, although we have not executed someone in the military in over 30 years. So if he gets a death penalty from the jury, he's probably not going to be put to death either way.
Yeah, it really begs the question, should they have just tried this as a non-capital case? And we all have our differing opinions on capital trials, whether you believe in them or don't believe in them. But at the end of the day, we probably could have had a verdict quite a while ago, and he would certainly be LWOP, which is life without the opportunity for parole, sitting in a cell somewhere, locked down 23 hours a day in Fort Leavenworth. He's probably not going to get executed anyways. It probably would have saved millions of dollars. We'd be done with this by now. That money somehow could be funneled back into taking care of the victims. Agree with you, Mike, that we've got to take care of the victims in this case. Is the route to do that calling it an act of terrorism before the trial? I don't know.
Yeah,
I just don't know. We got to take care of the victims. So whatever your beliefs are on capital punishment or not, would the smarter way to go to have been just to try this, get them LWOP'd, the life without the opportunity for parole, let them rot in a cell somewhere and call it a day and just move on? Is that the right call? It certainly is the topic for debate, and the overarching debate there, in my mind, would be, do you believe or not in capital punishment? And so that's a topic for another show altogether, but it's certainly something could have sped this trial up.
Yeah, these victims need closure, and it breaks my heart when I read the stories of some of these the family members and that are suffering, whether their family member was killed or just injured. It's had a devastating impact, and it really surprises. Not to go off on a tangent here, Tim, but we put all this emphasis on Hasan and his rights, and they're bending over backwards for that. But what we're forgetting about, I think, as a country, and this goes to the very top, is the people that were murdered and victimized when this happened, or by this individual. And I think the Army and our Commander-in-Chief need to step in here and make sure that the victims are taken care of. Regardless of what they want to call this, they need to take care of the victims.
Yeah, on that note, I couldn't agree with you more, Mike. Let's move on and talk about the Manning case, which is just about, I think the defense just wrapped up. There's some real interesting rebuttal that's going on now in the Bradley Manning case. Would you go ahead and enlighten our viewers on what's going on with this debacle?
Okay, this is, aside from Hasan, this is another one of the longest running court-martials. Finally, the court-martial started. It went on for weeks, and the defense finally rested. One of the witnesses that they called in the case, come on, they didn't have much to offer, okay? He pled guilty to half the charges. So one of the witnesses they called was a Harvard professor. We know how pro-military most Harvard professors are. But he came in to fight for Manning as part of the defense team to say that what Manning did by releasing hundreds of thousands of classified documents to the world was for a journalistic purpose, and it was for the betterment of the world. What was interesting, though, is after that, the prosecution then they get the right to rebut anything the defense puts on, and they called in a former colleague of Manning who testified that before Manning was deployed to Iraq, Manning had made some anti-American comments regarding his loyalty and the flag and things of that nature, which I don't know if the defense walked into that or they didn't know about that, but if Manning did in fact make anti-American comments and then went over to Iraq with sort of an anti-American agenda with the intent to hurt the United States, I think that could seriously impact the findings of the case, the verdict, as well as the sentence.
Yeah, I think it was a great rebuttal by the government. I think that whether the defense walked into that bear trap or didn't see it coming, I think it's great rebuttal on their part, and I think that Manning's going to have plenty of time to think about what he's done from behind a prison cell. That's just my take on it. We'll see when the verdict comes out. But I think it was a great job on the part of the government to put that type of rebuttal evidence on, because it really crushes a lot of what the defense was trying to do. So
I know, Tim, the courtroom, the court up there, it's very difficult to even get into it. I mean, even few reporters were even allowed in for even portions of it. A lot of it was held behind closed doors in a secret setting. So but the information that is not secret in the court martial is being reported on by the news. And to me, as an attorney and as also as a former Army officer and an American citizen, the fact that he's making comments about the flag. If he did in fact do that, and he's making anti-American comments before he released this information he wasn't supposed to release, and he's actually pled guilty to doing that, then that makes a big difference in my decision-making process about whether or not he should go to jail and for how long.
Yeah, it begs the question: why deploy him in the first place?
Yeah, that's an excellent point too. When I read that newspaper article, I'm thinking, okay, we have Hasan over here talking about how he's against the war, he's making jihadi statements, so we then send him to Fort Hood, okay? We have this guy, Bradley Manning, who's a young kid, apparently confused. He's making anti-American, he's an intelligence soldier. He works in military intelligence. He has access to a lot of classified information, and he's making anti-American comments, so what do we do with him? We deploy him and give him access to hundreds of thousands of dollars of classified documents. You kind of have to wonder, was somebody derelict in their duties? And that would be my rebuttal cross-examination on this witness. So he's telling you he's anti-American, and then what do? You then deploy him?
Absolutely.
Come on.
Well, I'm sure we can all read about
for losing your security clearance. So
I'm sure no, go ahead, Mike.
No, but it's I'm interested in seeing what happens in this case. It's been going on for a long time. It's been a battle between Dave Coombs and the prosecution. It's gone on for years. And interestingly, he's gone with a judge alone. He chose to not go in front of a jury. And what are your thoughts on how that may impact his sentence? His guilt and innocence and his sentence will be determined by a judge, one judge sitting on the bench.
Oh, that scares me. Going before a judge alone, it has probably been 4 to 5 years and maybe 80 to 100 trials since I've gone judge alone. The thought of going judge alone to have the same person be the judge, jury, and literally executioner is awful scary. I just don't know if I would have made that same call here. It's especially, what's the reputation of the military judge? Should she acquit him of these charges or give him a light sentence? I don't want to second guess what Coombs is doing here, and I'm sure he had great reasoning for why he did it. But I have a real tough time taking anything to a judge alone. In this type of a case, I probably would have gone with a panel, Mike. I just think you're going to get a better shot on either the findings as well as the sentence. It's a tough one. I don't know if I would have made. I'm certainly not privy to all of the information. I don't have all the resources that he has and all the facts to make the decision, but I'm kind of shaking my head saying, was that the right one? And I guess at the end of the day, we'll find out when the verdict and the sentence comes back. But I'm not sure if I would have made that same call.
I think we're looking probably at a verdict sometime this week, Tim.
I think that's what they're saying.
So, well, just Google court-martial, and you'll see all these news stories. You can follow them as they go day by day. These are all very interesting cases. And that about wraps up this episode of the Military Law News Network.
Well, thanks again, Mike, and from Hawaii, aloha.
Bye-bye.